Shortly after returning to office in January of 2025, President Trump established a religious liberty commission within the United States Department of Justice. Among other things, the purpose of this commission was to explore the status of religious liberty in the United States and to point out places where religious liberty was under attack in this nation. When you look at the individuals who were appointed commissioners and the additional persons who were appointed to the various advisory boards, it was clear from the very beginning that this commission was established to come up with a predetermined conclusion. And that was that Christianity is under attack in this nation. And not just Christianity broadly, but a particular version of conservative Christianity that was more aligned with the political leanings of President Trump and his allies. When you go and read the draft report, which was made available to the public this June, you will probably say, well, Terrance, it talks about anti Semitism as well. Yes, it does. But if you read it very closely, it's just purely political cover to get to this predetermined conclusion, because you don't see a lot of talk in this report on religious liberty about religious liberty for folks who aren't white Christians or who aren't conservative Jewish folks who will support this administration's particular brand of Christianity. You don't see much from other minority religious groups. Today, I want to spend a little bit of time, not much, talking about three key takeaways that I have from the report. Welcome to the Faithful Witness of Terrance Carroll podcast. I'm Terrance Carroll, an ordained Baptist minister, a public theologian, lawyer, and former Speaker of the Colorado House of Representatives. In each episode of the Faithful Witness of Terrance Carroll podcast, we explore the moral questions shaping our democracy, culture, and society from the perspective of the prophetic witness of the Black church. I hope you enjoy this week's episode. Let's get right to it. It is probably a misnomer to call the president's Religious Liberty Commission a commission about religious liberty or religious freedom, despite what they say it is and despite what they want it to be. As a preface to what I'm going to say for the remainder of the podcast, I want to be very honest, and maybe I'm not showing very much charity or grace to the commission. But when you look at its composition from the very beginning, it's hard not to imagine that this commission was a sham. Its chairman was the Lieutenant Governor of Texas, Dan Patrick, who's led the charge against Islam in Texas. You had Eric Metaxas on there, and if you don't know who he is a pseudo scholar who's tried to rewrite history when it comes to the great German theologian and pastor Dietrich Bonhoeffer to fall in line with right-wing Christian thought. If you didn't know any better, you would think that Bonhoeffer was in league with the German evangelical church, which was the version of the Christian church in Nazi Germany that supported Hitler and provided theological cover for the atrocities of the Nazi regime, rather than, as he truly was, a leader in the confessing church, which was opposed to the heretical version of Christianity of the Reichschurch, or the German evangelical church of the time. Franklin Graham was a member of this. So this should give you a little bit of feel and flair for the types of folks that were selected to be on this Religious Liberty Commission because they all have a certain perspective on faith and how faith should play a role in American society. These are the same folks who continue to perpetuate the myth and the lie that America was created as a Christian nation. In fact, when you read this report, you'll notice that they play some word games in an effort to make it seem like the founders and the drafters of the Declaration of Independence were intent on making this a Christian nation. They ignore the fact that the Declaration of Independence was built on Enlightenment principles and natural law, which aren't necessarily and weren't intended to be thought of as Christian theology. In the Commission's draft report, it misrepresents the Declaration of Independence and removes it from its moorings as an Enlightenment document. I would even say gaslight us into believing that this nation was founded as a Christian nation. That's thoroughly problematic and intellectually and theologically dishonest. But there's some other areas where this commission becomes even more dishonest and dishonest in some ways that are easily fact checked. One of the key things that they try to do early on in this report is align the findings of their report and their worldview as it relates to the role of religion in public life to the civil rights movement. Their argument is that religion has always been a part of the fabric of American life. I won't argue that particular point, but there's a finer point to be understood when it comes to the understanding of how religion has been a part of the fabric of American life. American civil religion has always been about this notion that America is the new Jerusalem, the new Israel, as John Winthrop said in the 1600s. To that extent, yes. But the founders made an affirmative choice to say that America is not a religious country. And to the extent that we use words of faith, it's for the creation of this American civic religion that America was called out of Europe, called out of Great Britain in particular, to represent this ideal of freedom and liberty based on Enlightenment democratic principles. That's probably the more accurate way to think of how religion or religious language was used in America. They know this to be true, but in order to get around it and to play in our faces, as some people would say, but to draw upon a historical moment that now most Americans would look at as a movement that should be emulated, they said, well, let's look at the civil rights movement. They explicitly claimed religious language to prod and push America to be a better place. That is true. But when you look at the ministers who were involved in the civil rights movement, not just Christian ministers, not just Protestant ministers, not just Episcopalians, not just Catholics, not just Jews, and even Muslims. It was an ecumenical and interfaith movement that was calling America to be a better place, not for the purpose of imposing any set of religious beliefs on the rest of the country, but to use language grounded in common theological beliefs at a high level to say that because we are all created in the image of God, there is no one group of people that should hold itself as superior to any other group of people in this great American democratic experiment. But what they're trying to say when you read the report in its totality, and it's not very good at hiding their intent, in my opinion. But what they're trying to say is if we use the civil rights movement as an example, it should be okay for right-wing evangelicals to impose their beliefs on others in the name of God. And that's the twist, the theology that was the basis of the civil rights movement, the ecumenical theology on its head. Because they weren't saying we're imposing our faith. They were saying our faith informs us to argue for a more inclusive America. Whereas they're arguing, these folks, Franklin Graham's and others, are arguing for a more exclusive America that is founded explicitly on Christian beliefs and should be led explicitly on this narrow set of Christian beliefs. The next thing that they go into, they say that the idea of the separation of church and state is mythical and it's made up. Although they do give lip service to Washington's letter to the Toro Synagogue and to Jefferson's letter to the Danbury Baptist Assembly, which in that letter, where we get the language of the separation of church and state. They like to say that the whole idea of the First Amendment was to carve out a protected place for religion in society and in American culture. That's partially true. That protected place was carved out so that we would not have government-imposed religious practices and beliefs, and also to protect the non-religious from having religious beliefs imposed upon them, and to ensure that religious beliefs did not dictate how government functioned in practice. Before we had this notion of separation in church and state, there were colonies that imposed religious tests for office who had an official state religion of sorts. Massachusetts early on, Virginia, which was Episcopalian, Maryland, which was Catholic. The only colony that never really had a religious test or saw itself explicitly as a colony for one religion or another was Rhode Island. And that was because the founder of Rhode Island, Roger Williams, fled Massachusetts to escape Puritanism and founded Rhode Island on principles of religious inclusion and on the principle that you can be in Rhode Island and be free of religious coercion. So their idea of separation of church and state is faulty, and it turns what Jefferson and Washington said on its head. Because when you read the letter that Jefferson wrote, it's a two-way street. The state shouldn't impose itself on religion, but religion should not impose itself on the state. Jefferson would have been dismayed by the manipulation and the twisting of his words in this draft commission report. If you read carefully, they want to change jurisprudence and practice in order to be able to take government money to subsidize religious practice. I'm a Baptist preacher. I love being a Baptist preacher. But I feel like the moment that we take government funds to subsidize and promote religious practice, we make our religious practices subordinate to whatever government happens to be in place. That's why for years the jurisprudence, which has been supported by many people of faith over the years, is that if you take government money, you explicitly understand that that money can't be used for ministerial purposes, so that the government, one, is not promoting religion, and secondly, us as religionists aren't being corrupted by the government's money being used to subsidize or support our ministry. Thank you for taking time to watch this week's episode of Faithful Witness with Terrance Carroll. Remember to tell the truth, seek justice, and love the people. This is Faithful Witness.